Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
June 30, 2020, the last day of June for the Daily Compliance News in 2020. And we begin with our lead story that diversity is good for business. As opined by Chris Tomlinson, business op-ed editor at the Houston Chronicle, he found that racism is just another excuse for maintaining corporate culture. The black woman that would not fit in where one manager works, the hair is different, the dress is different. Yet he believes that when a company embraces diversity, it actually makes the company a much better place to work because you have obviously differences, and this can make people and the business more robust, more able to respond to the moral and economic imperative to end unjust and destructive practices. And that actually makes the business better. So, while people may be uncomfortable with spending time with people who are not like themselves, bias is bad for business, destructive to the economy, and harmful to society. So interesting thoughts from Chris Tomlinson. Next up, from the Washington Post, the top CEOs who are in the Business Roundtable believe that the business fallout from coronavirus will extend through 2021. Chief executives of some of the biggest companies say nearly a third of them say the harm will last even longer. And this, I think, should be something that every compliance officer needs to factor into their decision-making calculus, and indeed every business executive listening to this podcast. What are you going to do not in Q3 and Q4, but in Q1, Q2, and Q3 in 2021? When we're still working from home, when we are still in reopening phases 2, 3, and 4. So something to think about from the Business Roundtable. Next up, in a major announcement, although not unexpected, as reported in the Wall Street Journal, Germany is overhauling its framework for accounting oversight following the Wirecard scandal. The Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection is working on new regulatory setup with the Federal Minister of Finance. The current entity, the Financial Reporting Enforcement Panel, is going to be disbanded and done away with, obviously not doing anything around Wirecard, and just a disaster for the brand Germany Inc. going forward. And finally, welcoming to the Daily Compliance News from the first time is Brookings. And in a very interesting essay entitled Oil, Gas, and Mining, Corruption, Is It Inevitable? The article looks at the offshore finds offshore Guyana and asks the question about global exploiting of extractive industries. The good lie for a corruption boom neither is inevitable, but the stakes are extraordinarily high. The corruption boom set off by resource wealth is not only morally reprehensible, but a humanitarian tragedy. Controlling it would yield good governance dividends to some of the poorest nations on earth and really help those who need the help the most. The extractive energy or this extractive mineral curse is well known, and the energy industry itself really needs to lead this effort to fight bribery and corruption and have good governance and, more importantly, good business practices in many of these countries going forward. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.